Jesus is baptized in the Jordan River, but why? Hi, I'm Michael Barber. I'm professor of biblical studies and theology at the Augustine Institute Graduate School of Theology here in St. Louis, Missouri. And this is part 2 of a series I'm doing on the baptism of Jesus. Now, let's zoom out a bit and look at the story of Jesus' baptism from a larger perspective within the narrative of the Gospels. After the baptism, Jesus goes out into the wilderness where he's tested by the devil for 40 days and 40 nights. The imagery is evocative of course, the story of Israel and the Exodus. Israel passes through the waters. They go through the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds, and they go out into the wilderness where God's people are tested. Many scholars, therefore, see the gospel writers casting Jesus in the role of Israel here. Jesus is, to quote the 2nd century writer Irenaeus, recapitulating or summing up the story of Israel. Richard Hayes says something similar. What gives further support to this reading is a detail from the baptism scene. When Jesus is baptized, a voice from the heavens says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Notably, the language is also evocative of Israel. In Exodus 4:22, Israel is called God's firstborn son. So in his baptism, Jesus is fulfilling the scriptures. He's summing up the story of salvation. He passes through the waters like Israel in the Red Sea. He goes out into the wilderness for 40 days and for 40 nights to be tested, as Israel was in the desert, in the wilderness for 40 years. And for more on this, you can see my previous series on Jesus fulfilling the scriptures of Israel in a surprising way. The church fathers, therefore, view Jesus' baptism as repenting on behalf of the people of God. Jesus is presented as suffering for the sins of others later, as in Matthew 20:28 and Mark 10:45, where Jesus is said to give his life as a ransom for many. But he can also be seen as repenting on behalf of the people of God. He's doing something similar to what Daniel does in Daniel 9, which I talked about in the previous video. Or he does what Moses does, as he is the new Moses. So to make Jesus' baptism into some kind of statement about Jesus' previous sinful life, read something into the story that really isn't there. And again, before the Gospels are written, Paul says Jesus is the one who knew no sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21. The sinlessness of Jesus is not simply later Christian theology, it's already in the bloodstream before the Gospels are written. So there's no need to insist that Jesus' baptism suggests that he had lived this sinful life and then had this great conversion. He's the representative of Israel. He does what Israel does. And so, drawing on Greek Orthodox writers and Catholic writers, Khalid Anatolios wrote a book where he talks about how Jesus is portrayed in terms of vicarious doxological contrition. Jesus' baptism is about Jesus entering into the story of Israel more than it is about his spiritual biography. And that said, there's quite a lot about Jesus himself and his role, his identity, and what he has come to do in this story of the baptism of Jesus. We'll talk about that in the next video. Thanks for watching.